It was a Tuesday in late September, and I remember the light was already turning that thin gold color it gets before fall really settles in. My wife had sent me into town for the week's groceries, and I stood in the produce section of a store I won't name, looking at a bin of pomegranates that had been marked down. 6 for $5. I picked 4 of them up without really looking, the way you do when you've been shopping the same aisles for 30 years, and your hands know what to grab before your eyes have even caught up. I got home, and that Saturday, with my granddaughter sitting at the kitchen table swinging her feet because they didn't reach the floor yet, I cut the first one open. It was pale inside, almost white where it should have been the color of a garnet stone. The seeds were shriveled, dry as little pebbles, and when my granddaughter popped one in her mouth to taste it, her whole face fell before she even said a word. I cut the second one open. Same thing. Same with the third. By the time I got to the fourth, my wife had stopped what she was doing and come to stand beside me, and neither of us said anything, because there wasn't much to say. $4 and change. Gone. Sitting in a compost bucket instead of a fruit bowl, and worse than the money was the look on that little girl's face, like she'd been promised something and it hadn't shown up. I stood there in my own kitchen, a man who has spent his whole life working the ground, and I could not tell you, standing in that grocery store 40 minutes earlier, which of those 4 pomegranates was going to be sweet, and which ones were going to be nothing at all. That bothered me more than the money did. It bothered me for weeks. Now I want you to sit with this for a moment, because it is the whole reason I am making this video. You were never taught to fail at picking fruit. You were taught nothing at all, and there is a difference between the two. There is no luck involved in choosing good food. There is only knowledge that either got passed down to you, or didn't. Every farmer's wife along this stretch of road once knew how to walk up to a bin of fruit or a basket of greens and tell you, in about the time it takes to say the words, which ones were worth carrying home. My own mother knew it. Her mother knew it before her, standing at a roadside stand not 2 miles from where I'm sitting right now, teaching her daughters with her hands more than her words, because that is how this kind of knowledge has always moved, from one set of hands to the next. My wife, Esther, still does this without thinking about it, the same way she knows how to tell if bread dough has risen enough just by pressing 2 fingers into it. She grew up outside a town not far from here in Lancaster County, and her grandmother ran a stand at the edge of their farm for almost 40 years, and there was not a customer who came to that stand who did not leave knowing something they hadn't known walking up. I am Elias Miller. I am Amish, and I farm here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, the way my father did and his father before him. What I am going to walk you through today are 15 foods, the kind mentioned again and again across the pages of Scripture, foods that fed people for thousands of years before anyone ever thought to put them in a plastic bag with a barcode on it. And for each one, I am going to give you a simple, physical test, something you can do standing right there in the store with your own 2 hands, so that you are never standing in your kitchen on a Saturday wondering where your money went. 15 foods, 15 tests. Most of them take less than 90 seconds, and none of them require anything but your eyes, your nose, and a little bit of patience. Before I go any further, I do want to say one thing, and I will only say it the one time. Everything I am about to teach you in this video, I have written down in more detail, along with the stories behind it, at eliasyoder.com. There was simply too much to fit into a single video, and I did not want to rush past any of it just to keep this shorter. I will not mention it again, so if you want it, you know where to find it. Now let's get into the foods themselves. The first one is olive oil, and if Scripture had a single food running through nearly every page of it, this would be the one. It anointed kings. It filled the lamps in the temple. It is pressed from a fruit that has been cultivated for over 6,000 years, and it remains, to this day, one of the only cooking fats that also functions as a genuine skincare ingredient, because of its high concentration of oleic acid and a compound called oleocanthal, which has a real, measurable anti-inflammatory effect in the body. Inflammation is the enemy of skin that ages well. It is the quiet process underneath redness, puffiness, and the kind of dullness that no amount of makeup fully covers. Here is what almost nobody checks in the store. Hold the bottle up to the light and look for a dark green or amber glass, never clear. Light destroys the very compounds you're paying for. Then look at the label for a harvest date, not just an expiration date. If all it lists is an expiration date 2 years out, with no mention of when the olives were actually pressed, put it back. A good bottle, when you finally taste it, should catch slightly in the back of your throat, almost like a cough. That sting means the good compounds are still alive in there. If it tastes like nothing at all, flat and greasy, you are paying for oil that has already given up everything useful it once had. My father used to say an olive oil that doesn't bite back isn't worth pouring. The second is the pomegranate, the very fruit that cost me $4 and a disappointed granddaughter that Saturday afternoon. Scripture describes the hem of the priestly robe, decorated with pomegranates woven in blue, purple, and scarlet thread, a fruit important enough to be stitched into the clothing of the temple itself. The seeds are loaded with collagens, a class of antioxidant compounds that some research suggests may support collagen, the protein responsible for skin's firmness, by helping protect existing collagen from the kind of oxidative breakdown that speeds up visible aging. Here is the test I wish I had done that Tuesday. Pick the pomegranate up and feel its weight against its size. A good one feels heavier than it looks like it should. Dense, almost like you're holding a stone wrapped in leather. The skin should be tight and slightly angular, almost like it has flat sides pressed into it, rather than perfectly round and smooth. A smooth, round, light pomegranate is a pomegranate that has been sitting too long, drying out from the inside before you ever see a crack in the skin. Esther taught our daughter to knock on the side of one gently with a knuckle, the way you'd knock on a door, and listen. A dull, heavy thud means the seeds inside are plump and full of juice. A hollow, tinny sound means you're about to cut into disappointment. Third is the fig, mentioned as far back as the garden itself, its broad leaves used for the very first clothing described in Scripture. Fresh figs are one of the few fruits that are genuinely difficult to find at their peak in most grocery stores, because they bruise and spoil within days of ripening, which means most of what reaches a shelf has been picked too early to ever finish properly. Figs carry a meaningful amount of natural sugars alongside potassium and a modest dose of vitamin K, which plays a role in skin's ability to heal and in reducing the appearance of dark circles and bruising under the eyes, since vitamin K supports the body's blood clotting and circulation processes right beneath the skin's surface. The test here is almost entirely about touch. A ripe fig should give slightly under gentle pressure from your thumb, the way ripe fruit should, but it should never feel wet or sticky on the outside, because that stickiness usually means it has already begun to ferment inside its own skin. Look for a small split or crack right at the base near the stem. That tiny crack is actually a good sign in a fig, evidence the fruit expanded naturally as it ripened on the tree rather than being picked hard and green. A fig with no give at all, firm as a plum, was picked far too early and will never sweeten sitting on your counter. It will simply go from hard to rotten, with almost nothing pleasant in between. Fourth are dates, described in Scripture as one of the 7 blessed species of the Promised Land, and to this day one of the most calorically dense fruits that exists in nature, which made them essential to travelers and armies moving across desert terrain where fresh food was scarce. Dates are rich in a class of antioxidants called phenolic compounds, along with meaningful amounts of copper, a mineral your body actually requires to produce the enzyme responsible for cross-linking collagen fibers, the very structure that keeps skin from sagging as you age. Most people grab a plastic clamshell of dates without a second thought. But here is what casual shoppers miss entirely. Good dates should look slightly wrinkled, almost like a raisin, never smooth and glossy. A smooth, shiny date has usually been coated in a sugar syrup to disguise the fact that it was harvested underripe and never developed its full flavor naturally. Press one gently between your fingers. It should feel soft and pliable all the way through, with no hard, dry patches near the pit. If you find a sugary crust of crystallization on the outside, that's not a defect. That's the natural sugars rising to the surface in a properly aged date, and it's actually a mark in its favor, rather than against it. Fifth is honey. The food Scripture uses again and again to describe abundance itself, a land flowing with milk and honey. Real honey never truly spoils, a fact confirmed by archaeologists who have found jars of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs still perfectly edible thousands of years later, because its low moisture content and natural acidity make it inhospitable to the bacteria that spoil almost everything else. Honey applied topically has been used for centuries as a natural humectant, meaning it draws moisture into the skin rather than sitting on top of it, and it contains small amounts of antibacterial compounds that some dermatology research has connected to faster healing of minor skin irritation. Here is the test almost nobody in a store ever performs. Turn the jar upside down. Real raw honey moves slowly, thick and reluctant, almost stubborn. If it flows quickly like syrup, it has likely been heavily processed and heated, a process that destroys many of the beneficial enzymes and pollen naturally present in the honey. Check the label for the word raw or unfiltered, and be suspicious of any honey priced dramatically lower than everything around it, since much of what is sold cheaply on store shelves has been cut with corn syrup, a practice food safety investigators have documented repeatedly over the years. Sixth are grapes, and their dried form, raisins, both mentioned throughout Scripture as staples of daily meals and festival offerings alike. Grapes, particularly darker varieties, carry a compound called resveratrol in their skins, a polyphenol that has drawn significant research interest for its antioxidant properties and its possible role in protecting skin cells from the kind of damage caused by ultraviolet light exposure. Here's what almost nobody checks. Look at the stem where it connects to the bunch. It should be green and flexible, almost springy, not brown and brittle. A brown, dried-out stem means the grapes were picked days ago and have been sitting in transit and storage far longer than the fruit itself would suggest, just from looking at the grapes alone. Give the bunch a gentle shake. If more than a couple of grapes fall loose, that bunch has already begun to deteriorate at the point where each grape connects to the stem, which is usually the very first place spoilage begins. Seventh are lentils, the very food Jacob was preparing when he traded a bowl of red stew for his brother Esau's birthright, one of the oldest cultivated foods in human history. Lentils are rich in zinc, a mineral your body relies on heavily for skin repair and for regulating oil production, which becomes increasingly relevant as skin's natural oil balance shifts with age. This is where what casual shoppers miss really matters. Pour a handful of dried lentils into your palm and look for uniform color and size. If you see a noticeable number of lentils that are shriveled, cracked, or a different shade than the rest of the batch, that bag has likely been sitting in a warehouse considerably longer than the harvest date on the label would suggest, and older lentils take dramatically longer to cook and never soften evenly. Eighth is barley, one of the 7 species and among the very first grains cultivated by human hands, ground for centuries into the bread that fed entire households. Barley contains beta-glucan, a type of soluble fiber that some research has connected to improved gut health, and increasingly, dermatologists are recognizing just how directly gut health and skin health are connected, since chronic inflammation, originating in digestion, frequently shows up on the skin's surface long before it shows up anywhere else. Buy barley whole rather than pearled whenever the store carries it, since pearling strips away the outer bran layer where much of that beta-glucan actually lives, leaving you with little more than starch. Ninth is wheat, ground into the bread that Scripture calls the staff of life, present at nearly every meal recorded across both testaments. Whole wheat retains vitamin E and a range of B vitamins in its germ and bran, nutrients almost entirely stripped away during the refining process that produces white flour. Vitamin E functions as an antioxidant directly within skin cell membranes, helping protect them from the kind of daily oxidative stress that accumulates slowly over decades. Here is the walk-away moment. If a loaf is labeled wheat bread, but the ingredient list shows enriched flour before whole wheat flour, walk past it. Enriched simply means nutrients were stripped out during processing and then partially added back afterward, and it is never a full substitute for a grain that was never stripped down in the first place. 10th are cucumbers, mentioned in the Book of Numbers among the foods the Israelites longed for after leaving Egypt. Cucumbers are composed of roughly 96% water, making them one of the most hydrating vegetables that exist, and proper hydration remains one of the simplest, most overlooked factors in skin that looks plump rather than drawn and tired. Press gently near the ends. A good cucumber should feel firm all the way through, with absolutely no soft or spongy give anywhere along its length. If you notice the ends looking slightly shriveled or pulled inward, that cucumber has already begun losing moisture, the exact thing you wanted it for in the first place. 11th is garlic, used throughout the ancient world both as food and as medicine long before anyone understood why it worked the way it did. Garlic contains a compound called allicin, released specifically when a clove is crushed or chopped, which research has linked to genuine antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory effects within the body. Here's the test. A good garlic bulb should feel heavy and tight in your hand, with the papery skin still fully intact and no green sprouts pushing up through the top. A sprouting clove has already begun converting its stored energy into new growth, leaving considerably less of that stored compound behind for you. 12th are leeks and onions, both specifically named among the foods the Israelites remembered from Egypt. Onions are rich in quercetin, a flavonoid antioxidant that has been studied for its role in stabilizing the very cells responsible for histamine release, meaning it may help calm the kind of skin redness and irritation associated with sensitivity. A good onion should feel solid all the way through with dry, papery outer skin, never soft or damp anywhere near the neck at the top, since sponginess near the neck is almost always the very first sign of rot working its way down from inside. 13th are almonds, mentioned specifically as the fruit carved into the golden lampstand described in the book of Exodus. Almonds are one of the richest natural sources of vitamin E among all tree nuts, alongside a meaningful amount of magnesium, a mineral connected to reduced cortisol levels, and cortisol, the stress hormone, is directly linked in dermatological research to accelerated collagen breakdown. Buy almonds raw and in the shell whenever you can, since shelled almonds sitting exposed to light and air on a shelf for months lose a significant portion of their vitamin E content well before the printed expiration date ever arrives. 14th is fish, and while scripture does not always name the species directly, the disciples themselves were fishermen along the Sea of Galilee, and fish remained a central protein source throughout the ancient Near East. Fatty fish in particular carry omega-3 fatty acids, which dermatology research has connected to a stronger skin barrier and reduced inflammatory redness. At the counter, press the flesh gently with one finger. It should spring back almost immediately. If your fingerprint stays pressed into the flesh for more than a second or two, that fish has been sitting considerably longer than the case label suggests. The 15th and final food is milk and its cultured forms, curds and what we would today call yogurt, central to the very description of the Promised Land itself. Fermented dairy contains probiotic bacteria that support gut health, and a growing body of research over the last decade has connected gut bacteria diversity directly to inflammatory skin conditions, suggesting the two systems are far more linked than most people realize. Look for a short ingredient list, ideally just milk, and live active cultures, nothing else. A long list of stabilizers and added sugar usually means fewer of those living cultures survive the manufacturing process at all. Before I go on, I want to mention something, and then we'll get right back to it. Esther and I, along with a few other families here in the county, keep something we simply call the Seed and Stand Fund, a shared account the community uses to help young families get a roadside stand started for the very first time. The same kind of stand her grandmother ran for 40 years. There's a link in the description if you'd ever like to know more about how it works. Now, back to where we were. Now I want to take a moment, because this is where it all comes together. 15 foods, and 15 simple physical truths your own two hands can uncover in less time than it takes to read this sentence. The dark glass and the bite in the throat for the oil. The weight and the knock for the pomegranate. The give and the small honest crack near the stem for the fig. The gentle wrinkle instead of the false shine for the date. The slow, stubborn pour for the honey. The green, springy stem for the grape. The uniform color in your open palm for the lentil. The whole grain instead of the pearled one for the barley. The name on the label read all the way through for the wheat. The firmness end to end for the cucumber. The tight skin and the missing sprout for the garlic. The dry neck for the onion. The shell still closed around the almond. The flesh that springs back beneath your finger for the fish. The short, honest list of ingredients for the cultured milk. None of this is complicated. None of it ever was. It was simply passed down. The way the sun passes its warmth into the vine. The way the vine passes its sweetness into the fruit. Quietly, generation after generation. Until one day, it stopped being passed down at all. You now have back something that was almost lost. You can walk straight past the bad ones now, and you will know exactly why you're walking past them. Here is the part that troubles me most, and I think it's worth saying plainly. There is very little money in teaching someone how to pick a good pomegranate. There is a great deal of money in a shopper who cannot tell the difference, who buys whatever is in front of her without a second thought, week after week, disappointment after disappointment, never quite sure why half of what she brings home doesn't taste like she remembers it tasting as a child. A grocery store does not profit from a customer who takes 90 extra seconds testing the weight of a fruit in her hand. It profits, quietly and reliably, from one who doesn't. Somewhere in the last 2 or 3 generations, as families moved off the land and into cities, as roadside stands gave way to supermarket chains, the simple, physical knowledge that used to move naturally from a grandmother's hands into her daughter's hands, and from her daughter's hands into her own daughter's hands, stopped moving. It wasn't stolen from anyone in some dramatic fashion. It just quietly stopped being taught, because there was no one left standing at the stand to teach it, and no particular profit in anyone stepping in to replace her. You don't have to guess anymore. That's really all this video has ever been about. So here is what I want you to do this week. If you have a farm stand anywhere near you, even one that seems like a small, unremarkable little operation on the side of the road, go there first, before the grocery store. The person standing behind that table usually knows exactly which bin was picked yesterday and which one has been sitting since Monday, and they'll usually tell you if you simply ask. If a stand isn't within reach, take these 15 tests into your regular grocery store and use them exactly as we walked through them. Pick up 2 pomegranates side by side and compare their weight in your hands before you choose either one. Press 2 figs gently between your fingers and feel for the difference between ripe give and hollow softness. Turn a honey jar upside down right there in the aisle and watch how it moves. None of this requires anything except the 90 seconds you were probably going to spend standing there anyway. And then, this coming Saturday, do exactly what we did in our kitchen. Cut into what you brought home with the people you love standing around the table. Let the children do the tests with you at the store beforehand. Let them feel the weight of the fruit in their own small hands. And then let them see the payoff when you cut it open together, and it's exactly what you both expected it to be. Deep red instead of pale and dry. Dense and heavy with juice instead of hollow. Sweet in the way it was always supposed to be sweet. That is how this knowledge comes back into a family. Not through a video, not through a website, but through a Saturday afternoon, and a kitchen table, and a child who now knows something her mother didn't know how to teach her, because I am teaching it to you first. Tell me in the comments below which of these 15 tests you had never heard before in your life, and which one your own grandmother or mother used to swear by that we didn't cover today, because every family seems to carry 1 or 2 of their own that never made it into any book. I read every single comment that comes through, and some of the best knowledge I have ever picked up over the years came from a stranger typing out something her own grandmother used to say, standing at a stand very much like the one Esther's grandmother ran. Your family's little trick, the one you think is too small or too strange to mention, might be exactly the thing someone else's grandmother took to her grave without ever passing it on. Don't let that happen twice. Next time, since we have been speaking of the food scripture set before us, I want to walk you through the herbs and spices mentioned across those same pages, the kind our ancestors kept in small clay jars, and used as much for healing as for flavor. It felt like the natural next step after today, since so many of them work quietly alongside the very foods we just covered, the oil, the grain, the fruit, each one meant to be used together rather than alone. I'll show you how to tell a spice that still has life left in it from one that's simply taking up space in your cabinet. Until then, may your bins be full and your baskets honest. The bees do their part, and the sun does its part, and the vine does its part, long before any of it ever reaches your hands. And all that's ever been asked of us is to know enough to receive it well. I'll see you next time.